My name is Roger Buck, and today we're going to be talking about Traditionis Custodes, which is the new motu proprio from the Holy Father, severely restricting the Latin Mass in the world and shockingly overturning, it seems to me, the core of the entire liturgical thrust of the last pontificate of his predecessor, Pope Benedict XVI. And what we have here, it seems to me, is a very serious, very grave matter in the life of the Church. Indeed, I'm going to go further. If I'm honest, it strikes me as a serious matter in the life of the West, dare I say, in the life of humanity. I'm well aware how excessive, how hyperbolic even that might sound, particularly if you don't share my Catholic faith that the Lord Jesus Christ gave his body and his blood for the life of the world. And he founded the Church to distribute his body and blood for the life of the world. And yet today, the Church is in an appalling crisis where people no longer see that. I mean, in many Catholic churches today, it seems like people line up for the Eucharist like biscuits in a cafeteria queue. Not all of them, but you can have that kind of impression for sure. And it's because people have lost sight of the cosmic miracle of the Eucharist that is happening on the altars of the Church all across the world. Every day in the Catholic Church, this is happening. And yet people no longer see it because the liturgy no longer signals it to them in the way that it once did. It no longer witnesses to this cosmic miracle of the distribution of his body and blood. And in the horrendous situation that the Church finds herself in today, it seems to me that this is at the core of everything. That's why I completely concur with Pope Benedict XVI when he was still Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, and he said that the ecclesial crisis in which we find ourselves today depends in great part upon the collapse of the liturgy. These are just indicators as to why I take this motu proprio as seriously as I do. But as seriously as I take this motu proprio, it's not just the motu proprio, because the motu proprio is a milestone, I would say, a very significant milestone in a much longer drama in the Church and a much bigger and graver picture that's been taking the Church over for at least 60 years. We're going to come back to Valentin Tomberg in this episode, who we started speaking of last time. Valentin Tomberg, writing in the 1960s, spoke about how Vatican II had tragically opened a doorway, opened a portal to forces of degeneration, decay, death forces in the Church. And it is degeneration and decay when people just automatically file up to the altar to have the Eucharist as a biscuit. Forces of degeneration and decay, as I see it, have been let loose in the Church, just as Tomberg said, And this is why, for me, may sound hyperbolic for me to speak about all of this in terms of not just a crisis for the church, but a crisis for humanity. But I've said it before on this channel, I'm going to say it again, friends. I have no hope for humanity without the church. Certainly no hope for humanity in this very dark time. But I have no hope for the church until the church can begin to regenerate herself, which I am supremely confident that she can and which she will, which Tomberg is also pointing to. But more of that later. What I'm really trying to say now is to locate what I have to say about Traditionis Custodes in terms of this much, much bigger and much more tragic picture of the church, and as I say, tragic for all of humanity. Now, in talking about these things, I personally face a conundrum, a moral conundrum, a conundrum between two opposites, two opposed visions. Because what we have here with this motu proprio is a vision that runs completely opposite, it would seem to me, to the vision of Pope Benedict XVI for healing the church in this time of crisis. And, clearly the vision that I am holding in my own tiny, meager way is not in agreement with what Pope Francis has expressed in the motu proprio and the letter that accompanies it. And I say this is a conundrum because Catholicism is about obedience. Whether it's the obedience of a monk to his abbot, or to a bishop, or to the Holy Father, Catholicism is about obedience. So, how do I speak about this? Must I remain silent? That is a question that I have been asking myself, as much as it might surprise some of my viewers. I'll come back to that. Must I remain silent? Because, to be honest, friends, for the most part, what I've been doing for quite a number of years is choosing, rightly or wrongly, choosing the path of silence. Unusually for many traditionalist writers, authors, such as myself, if you go through, or commentators, if you go through this YouTube channel, you will be hard-pressed to find any criticism of Pope Francis on this channel. The same is true of my website. So largely, I have been, as I say, rightly or wrongly, dealing with this problem by staying silent. Now, there is one major exception here. That exception is my recent novel, The Gentle Traditionalist Returns, because in that novel is really, it's hardly a novel. I mean, it is a novel. I tend to think of it as a manifesto for what I think about the church and the world in this time of crisis. In this novel, so-called novel, it is a novel in a way, I have a character called Anna. And in a few places, not many places, Anna's kind of like my heroine, really. Anna does express things that I have so far been, to a large extent, silent about. And I want to just share a couple of quick things from the novel, manifesto, because they relate to things I want to say here for various reasons. So, just a very brief line here. Anna hardly knew how to talk about Pope Francis. She believed in loyalty to the Holy Father and refused to reveal her true feelings regarding him to anyone except me. That's her husband. I haven't gone as far as Anna, but nonetheless, she does express how I feel, or maybe how I'd like to be. In many ways in the book, she expresses, as I say, she's my heroine in a way. So, yeah, I offer this as a way of saying this is what I'm about to do on this video is going to be very much breaking patterns. Personally, it's quite a big deal for me making this video. But before we go forward, I'm just going to point to and comment on one other passage in the book, which is relevant. Much had changed for the worse since the shocking resignation of Pope Benedict XVI in 2013 led to the new papacy of Pope Francis. That new papacy created a new ecclesiastical climate, a more progressive one that empowered liberal voices. It also led to what looked like civil war. Utter chaos reigned in the church. The church was divided and thereby crippled, Anna said. I want to stress and repeat that last line. The church was divided and thereby crippled, because it goes very much to the heart of what I want to say in this video, and interestingly enough, it goes to the heart of what the Holy Father is saying, because what's in this document, these documents, the motu proprio itself and the accompanying letter, is manifestly a concern about the church being divided, and it may well be that the Holy Father believes that the church is crippled by this division, as I do. And this is being offered as a solution, or at least part of the solution, is to encourage the Latin Mass to die out. I think that's very clear in these documents, that there's a hope that the Latin Mass will die out in time, and the culture, I think, around it will die out in time. Let me just focus on a couple of lines from the document itself. Speaking in reference to Pope Paul VI, the Holy Father invokes the fact that Paul VI hoped for a single and identical prayer that would express the unity of the Church, and the Holy Father, Pope Francis, goes on to say, "This unity I intend to re-establish throughout the Church of the Roman Rite." And he goes on to say, "In defense of the unity of the body of Christ, I am constrained to revoke the faculty granted by my predecessors." The Holy Father is very, very serious here, very determined, I believe. The word predecessors, plural, is also striking. It's used throughout the letter, because it suggests, obviously, that the Holy Father is not just moving in the opposite direction of Pope Benedict XVI, he's moving in the opposite direction of St. John Paul II, because he believes, or he asserts, that their vision has failed. It's failed to produce unity here. And so a different course is being plotted here. And yeah, it's very serious. There's a memorable image that comes from Dr. Peter Kwasniewski about this. He likens the document to a Swiss army knife. I would concur with that. It appears to be designed with many knives and tools, whatever it takes to get the job done. I mean, for those of us who have been following the situation for a long time, we may recall Amoris Laetitia, and how Amoris Laetitia had a single footnote that was then very much used to drive home what the Holy Father was trying to do. This document has far, far, far more than a single footnote. What can I say? One theme in this video, as I say, is I want to explore the issue of obedience. Must I remain silent? How we speak about the Holy Father in this situation. And I want to say that sometimes Dr. Kwasniewski and other commentators on the Latin Mass do use language sometimes that I wouldn't use myself. But I deeply salute the acute awareness that Dr. Kwasniewski brings to this whole situation. I salute it. In fact, I'm going to continue on this aside and say that once I was questioned, criticized, I'm not sure, on social media by a traditionalist, by someone who has done much to support the Latin Mass over many years. And this person was questioning, I think, my support of Dr. Kwasniewski, presumably, quite possibly because of this question of language. I don't want to say who this person is. I will simply note that he is a European, not an American. But yeah, I have to say that my response, I put something up on my website about this, is to really say that if sometimes certain people use language that may seem to others to go too far, maybe it's because their hearts are in pain. Maybe it's because their hearts and their minds are awake to an appalling situation in the church. And I salute awakeness to this situation in the church wherever I find it. That said, in the course of this video, I do want to explore further the question of how we speak about this online. Moving on though, Traditionis Custodes and the letter that accompanies it really begs a question in my mind, because even if one were to accept the thesis that what St. John Paul II and Pope Benedict XVI have done have sowed such division in the church, or led to such division in the church, even if one were to accept that thesis, I personally say I have to find it very hard to accept that thesis. But if one were to accept it, one would have to ask about other sources of division in the church. Like, why has the Holy Father so specifically, and it seems so severely, targeted this asserted source of division in the church? Because it does seem like he specially and severely targeted it. No one would expect letters, say, to progressives and liberals in the church, who are often, disobedient to church teaching, severely disciplining them like this. We've seen nothing like that. So, it brings up the question, what about other sources of division in the church, which perhaps run much deeper than anything St. John Paul II or Pope Benedict have done? Now, to be fair to the Holy Father, he does very briefly acknowledge this in the document, and I've got it up on screen now, so I'll read that. He speaks about how, the Latin Mass, or the culture around the Latin Mass, has been exploited to widen the gaps, reinforce the divergences, and encourage disagreements that injure the church, block her path, and expose her to the peril of division. I think something is good there, friends. It's good that the Holy Father has acknowledged pre-existing sources of division here, because that's certainly the way many of us see this. We're on common ground. Again, I'll come back to my character Anna in the book, who speaks about civil war in the church. A civil war presupposes that there are two sides. There might be more sides, but, fighting. It's not just one group. There are multiple factions fighting. And that's certainly how I and many other people see it. And it goes back, as I say, a long time. It goes back, I would say 60 years in the church. And I want to bring something up to substantiate that. This is a book called The Rhine Flows into the Tiber. It was written by a journalist and a priest, Ralph Wilken, back in the 1960s, and it's widely hailed as an objective, non-partisan, behind-the-scenes account of what was going on at Vatican II. I want to make this very clear. The journalist and priest who wrote this was by no means, no accounts, any kind of disgruntled traditionalist trying to, find fault with liberals in the church. Nonetheless, he gives a very sobering account of how liberals in the church outmaneuvered, the conservatives or so-called conservatives by some very questionable tactics indeed. Right now, I just want to focus on one event, an event involving a Cardinal Ottaviani, right at the very beginning of Vatican II, the first weeks of the Council in 1962, nearly 60 years ago now. And I want to just focus on one brief account of a very disturbing moment at the beginning of the Council. So here we go. Cardinal Ottaviani addressed the Council to protest against the drastic changes which were being suggested in the Mass. Are we seeking to stir up wonder or perhaps scandal among the Christian people by introducing changes in so venerable a rite that has been approved for so many centuries and is now so familiar? The rite of Holy Mass should not be treated as if it were a piece of cloth to be refashioned according to the whim of each generation. Speaking without a text because of his partial blindness, he exceeded the 10-minute time limit which all had been requested to observe. When Cardinal Ottaviani reached 15 minutes, Cardinal Alfrink rang the warning bell. But the speaker was so engrossed in his topic that he did not notice the bell or purposely ignored it. At a signal from Cardinal Alfrink, a technician switched off the microphone. After confirming the fact by tapping the instrument, Cardinal Ottaviani stumbled back to his seat in humiliation. The most powerful cardinal in the Roman Curia had been silenced, and the council fathers clapped with glee. So people can make of that what they will. I mean, some people may say, well, here's a cardinal who overshot the mark and he got what he deserved. Other people, and I would be one of them, would say here is a partially blind man standing up for what he thought was crucial, the liturgy, who was publicly humiliated, and this clapping in glee as this non-partisan observer reports it is something disgraceful. And there are many other things that happened at Vatican II that seem to me quite disgraceful. But whatever we make of that, one thing cannot be denied, and that is that this problem, this division in the church goes back 60 years, 1962, 60 years next year. And then, we have to look at, what's happened in the intervening 60 years, because we have plenty of profound and wise witnesses to that. One of the chief sources for me has been Joseph Cardinal Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, who we quoted at the beginning of the video as saying the ecclesial crisis in the church has so much to do with the collapse of the liturgy. Joseph Ratzinger was a well-known progressive at Vatican II, but over the course of 50 years, seeing what happened to the liturgy and much else, he obviously came to very much revise his opinion. So I'm someone who, I used to be, for what little it is worth, liberal myself. It's taken me, took me a long time to come to this defense of tradition that I'm trying to mount in my own meager way. So I have to say, we've got a quote here, another quote from Traditionis Custodes. The Holy Father is speaking about the need to not create new personal parishes which are tied more to the desire and wishes of individual priests than to the real need of the holy people of God. I find myself in the position of questioning the Holy Father because I don't see the need for new centers of the Latin Mass to be a matter of individual priests. Obviously I'm not a priest, and for what very, very little it's worth, these seem to me essential for what the Holy Father calls the holy people of God. That's just my own very poor individual judgment, but my point is that there are many, many, many more people like me. We have a division in the church, and if someone were attempting to reduce this to the wishes of individual priests, in my opinion, he would not be judging the situation adequately. So I guess the key point here I'm saying is many of us see something very, very tragic here. We see it going back a long way, and we don't see that, this tragic division in the church, this civil war in the church, is going to end by abrogating Summorum Pontificum, or indeed abrogating the will of St. John Paul II. I mean, what can I say? I think I want to begin by saying that I've just said that I'm calling the Holy Father into question, but I'm not just doing that, I'm publicly calling him into question. This is a big deal, although I'm not sure how many of us really realize it anymore. But certainly, in all my years as a Catholic, I never thought that I would be, doing what I'm doing now. We live in this extraordinary time where we see that, cardinals of the church are doing the same thing. And all kinds of things are going on. We live in an extraordinary moment in the papacy, friends. And I'm going to call attention to something else that's in this document. Well, I've already said it before, but the Holy Father expresses his concern about disagreements that injure the church, block her path, expose her to the peril of division. Okay, there's an elephant in the room here. At least there is for me, and I'm going to start naming it. It seems to me that there are vast tracts of the church that do not so much think that what is imperiling the church with division is things like Summorum Pontificum, but they notice that since 2013, when this papacy began, all kinds of things have been happening that never happened before. I really want to stress this. This, I'm concerned with this is all becoming normalized. But, when I became a Catholic, in the year 2000, things like this were not happening. With, St. John Paul II or Benedict XVI, I'm concerned that we have like a whole generation of people growing up now, people who've come to adulthood during this pontificate who may not even realize how extraordinary this is. To have a whole culture of YouTubers like myself calling the Holy Father into question, cardinals calling the Holy Father into question. No, the Catholic pattern over centuries has been obedience, honor thy father and thy mother. I pray that in this video I'm not dishonoring the Holy Father, but it's a tough one. And yeah, there's this extraordinary, let's keep it at that. I could easily use much stronger words, but there's a need to restrain myself. There is an extraordinary set of circumstances producing division in the church that for many of us looks like it, accelerated in 2013. It didn't accelerate, with Summorum Pontificum in 2007. And yet there seems to be not a lot of acknowledgement of that. I find it really hard to know how to talk about this. I think praying about this more needs to be named about what I mean by this extraordinary situation. And we can't go into a whole catalogue of things. I assume most of my viewers will have a very good idea of what I mean. There are so many things. There are, as I mentioned, the cardinals proposing dubia to the Holy Father, or high-ranking figures proposing other problems to the Holy Father. And then, of course, there is the matter of the Holy Father's responses to those things, or indeed non-responses to those things. There's just so much here. Maybe this isn't fair to mention, I hope, but it's public knowledge. With the synods that led to Amoris Laetitia, synods in, I think, 5-6 years ago, there was a leaked letter from certain very high cardinals in the church who are not publicly calling the Holy Father into question. So it's a leaked letter, but people like Cardinal Dolan of New York, Archbishop of Toronto, Karl Mueller, who was then the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, that letter was suggesting that the synods lacked transparency. They lacked openness. They lacked genuine collegiality. I hope I'm not going too far, but all of this is very common knowledge, and it's all acting on people, and acting on the way they're thinking, especially in this now, culture of social media and Facebook and YouTube. What to say? Out of all of this, I'm going to select one more pattern in this mix. So I'm suggesting here that not only are people calling the Holy Father into question in an extraordinary way that never existed before. Maybe it existed 500 years ago at the Reformation, and we all saw what happened then. It's Protestants who do this. You know, the normal pattern for Catholics is not to do this. But we don't seem to be living in normal times. So there is this whole culture at its worst. You know, I'm not saying everyone, but it's at its worst. It seems to me like a culture of insulting the Holy Father. But here is the rub. If all of this is happening, insulting the Holy Father, there are reasons for this. There's no, smoke without fire. And one of the things, and I am deciding to highlight it, is that the Holy Father is widely perceived, whatever the truth of the matter, as being insulting himself. And we could bring up many, many instances of this, but I want to keep this as limited as I can. One of the most famous examples, of course, is that the Holy Father once suggested that Catholics who were, faithful to the Church in terms of her teachings around marriage, he suggested they were breeding like rabbits. Now, it's true in that case he actually apologized for that. But it's not easy for me to say this. This is the tip of an iceberg. I don't go out there much on social media, but even I know, or the internet, less and less, I know that out there is this website called the Little Book of Pope Francis's Insults, something like that. I think I looked it up the other day, and it had been changed to the Bumper Book of Pope Francis's Insults. So you can surf to this webpage, and you can find all kinds of things from the Holy Father that look very much to me, and I think to the rest of us, as very insulting. This, I have to say, is imperiling the unity of the Church. I question the wisdom of putting this together on a website, but whether or not it's put on a website or not, the fact is that nobody could have created a website of the insults of Pope Benedict XVI or the insults of St. John Paul II. Because before this extraordinary time, this is a time that maybe not even many young people can remember, things like this were not happening in the Church. So it seems to me that we have a very unusual, unprecedented situation in the history of the Church. Putting it mildly, less mildly, I have likened it to civil war, because there are different sides fighting each other. They're not throwing literal bombs, but often they're throwing verbal bombs. And it's been going on a very long time, whether it's, cardinals clapping in glee when an old man has his microphone cut off, or indeed whether it's traditionalists who, in my experience, can definitely be far from gentle. It's one reason why I wrote my Gentle Traditionalist books, because I wanted to make a call for gentle traditionalism. In my experience of traditionalism, I think it's, has to be said that the traditionalist community has felt hurt for many, many years, and hurt people do lash out at times. It's a fact of our fallen human nature. We're all very fallen. Now, I think in these documents, the Holy Father is getting at this. That there, can be divisive behavior on the part of traditionalists. And I would not deny that. For me, it's not so much a question of are traditionalists in the church sometimes divisive, because in my view, they certainly can be. No, the question for me is, are traditionalists the only source of division in the church? And I'm making myself clear. I think there's a civil war here, with plenty of blame to go around everywhere. But the Holy Father, at least in this document, does seem to be allocating blame, it seems to me, I hope I don't put that too strongly, on one group of people only. As I indicated earlier, I think it's not likely that we're going to see future documents, from the Holy Father disciplining liberals and progressives in the church. Not like this. I would be delighted to be proved wrong here. No, my reading of the situation is that the Holy Father is locating the blame overwhelmingly in one place. And friends, there's a word for that. There's a word when you select one group of people in a complex, multifaceted situation and you attribute the blame to that one set of people. That word is scapegoating. Okay? So am I saying that the Holy Father is consciously seeking to scapegoat a certain group of people? I am not saying that. I do not want to go anywhere near that in terms of consciousness. The whole factor in this mix, I think, is that the Holy Father has one of the hardest jobs, maybe the hardest job in the entire planet. A portfolio that means he has to be a diplomat, a leader, a public speaker, a theologian. The multitasking of this job is, off the scale. If I were a Holy Father, I would crack up in 5 seconds flat. So, the Holy Father is dealing with many, many, many things. And all popes and all Holy Fathers, are bound to not know how to hold all the balls in the air, I'd say. It's not for me to judge the Holy Father's motives here, or how conscious they are, but I think that we can certainly say that the Holy Father will be perceived as being unfair by many people. He will be perceived as scapegoating. And part of the problem here, is that this is very severe. These are people, traditionalists with the Latin Mass, who have been told by Pope Benedict XVI and told by St. John Paul II for many years that what they were doing was loved and appreciated by the Church. Many of these people, having that assurance from the predecessors of Pope Francis, would be, they made enormous sacrifices, working for this liturgy. I know in places like America, there will be whole families that have relocated, thousands, hundreds and thousands of miles, to be near one of these centers, which, can now be closed down, with the, as Dr. Kwasniewski puts it, and I think he's right, the Swiss Army knife here. This document just has all these tools to empower bishops to close this Mass down, and it seems that's very much what the Holy Father intends. Based on a reading of the situation, it seems to me that traditionalists are the problem. Alright, before I continue, I'd like to make a small apology, because I just said something I'm not happy with. I said something to the effect that I would be delighted if the Holy Father would discipline liberals and progressives, and I think I might have sounded like in like manner. No, I would not be delighted if the Holy Father disciplined liberals and progressives, because this is causing, or has the potential to cause, if the Swiss Army knife is used, tremendous amounts of pain for the traditionalist community after all they've worked for all these years. And I would not be happy for liberals and progressives to be subjected to this. I would simply be delighted if there were more acknowledgement about many, many factors in this mix. But also in this matter where I'm emphasizing the suffering of traditionalists, I want to say that that's an issue and it's serious. But for me, there's far more serious issues, dare I say it, and I've been trying to highlight them in this video, and that go beyond the suffering that any traditionalist might find. So what I've been saying in this video is that the Church suffers from this 60-year division. The Church is crippled. And I started the video by speaking about how the Church's mission is to distribute the body and blood of Jesus Christ, to bring grace to people, the grace of the sacraments, the grace of the cosmic miracle of the Eucharist. And we live in an age of the destruction of faith. Baptisms are falling, vocations are falling. Fewer and fewer, people have this. And we all know that this is serious, friends. But I want to just pause for a moment and invite deepened contemplation as to how serious this is. Think for a moment of our nursing homes, with elderly people, often in states of dementia, things like that. Or think of, the rising levels of depression, mental illness, suicide in the world. And then think back to a time when Catholics had faith. Imagine being an atheist or an agnostic in one of these nursing homes versus, having faith in Christ and His Church. This division, this civil war in the Church, this crippling of the Church in her mission of bringing the cosmic miracle of the sacraments of the body and blood of Christ is very serious. I mean, I think often that, Christians, Catholics, have not enough idea, I'm sure I don't, of how lucky we are that we have this faith. And all kinds of other people do not have it, and they will be going to their graves without faith. And this kind of division in the Church is crippling her. So I brought that up. I wanted to bring that up at the beginning of the video, but I had other reasons for doing that. And it's along the lines of what I'm calling an effort, I don't say I succeed, but an effort to gentle traditionalism. Because, at its worst, basically I would like to really emphasize the heartbreak and the tragedy of what's going on here, rather than insulting people or calling people names. I'm not saying I'm innocent in that way. But, for example, I've actually spent, since this motu proprio came out, by my standards, extraordinary amounts of time on social media. I've been on Twitter like never before in my life. I don't mean tweeting, I mean just reading Twitter, or reading Facebook. I almost never do this. But I've been doing this, And, like I think at one point I saw somebody speaking about the Holy Father as Satan. I think I actually saw something, I can't remember exactly, but could have been in capital letters. Capital Satan. I hope this is an isolated example. I'm not on social media enough to know. But I would very much like to counsel us, obviously, against things like that. But if we speak more about the tragedy of this, rather than resorting to the language of evil or diabolical or satanic or things like that, but we just keep our hearts awake to the tragedy of what this means. And I don't just mean, as I say, the tragedy for, the traditionalists who, stand to lose so much, but the tragedy, the much greater tragedy of the church divided and crippled. All of this begs a very, very deep question of what do we do here? And on this video, I'm doing something, as I say, this is unprecedented for me. It's like in fact, right now, friends, I'm recording this. I don't know if you'll ever be seeing this. I think you will, because I have been praying about this. I'm taking this step, but it's possible that even I'll put the video up and I'll take it down again. Because I am aware, at least I hope I'm a bit aware, of what I'm doing here. Taking this big step of calling publicly into question the Holy Father like this. Some people might say I'm scapegoating the Holy Father. I want to think about things like that. I want to be aware of them. Sometimes I'm thinking, it's like, I can imagine, I don't know for sure, that there might be some viewers on the, maybe they're younger viewers, maybe they're young men, who might think I'm being a bit namby-pamby. Like, why am I making such a big deal of questioning the Holy Father like this? Yeah, this is a subject, I think, for another video, but I want to say this. I suspect, I'm getting indications that there is a culture of young men, people, coming to adulthood, in the last 10 years or so, whose formation, whose catechesis has been entirely through things, or almost entirely, through things like YouTube. And maybe some of the time that's doing amazing things for them. I think it is. But other times, I question what that's doing. In any event, my formation and my catechesis was not through YouTube. And so I remember this time when, everything that's happening now is extraordinary. And, I think also, the process of my formation happened in different countries over different times. I entered the Catholic Church in Switzerland in the year 2000. I didn't get much catechesis there, but there was no YouTube back then. And I went on through different countries. At one point, I was living in Spain. I knew a group of very special Spaniards who were devoted to Saint Ignatius of Loyola. And they told me a story that is quite relevant to the theme I'm entering now. I've never read the story, but I trust the essence of it is true. The story goes something like this. Saint Ignatius, as I say, this is the essence. I don't have the exact details, but I think the essence is true. Apparently spent many years preparing a constitution of the Jesuits, and he was waiting to submit it to the Holy Father. And somebody said to St. Ignatius, what would you do if the Holy Father rejected your constitution. And according to the story, anyway, St. Ignatius of Loyola said, um, after all these years working on it, this is how I heard the story, tear it up, tear up the Constitution, go and sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament for half an hour, and start again. I bring this whole thing up because I just really want to emphasize that obedience to the Holy Father is something that is very important. You know, Protestants are more in the business of questioning authority. The strength of Catholicism all these years is to not do this. Not in the same way that Protestants do. This video is a big break from anything I've done before. And I'm praying. I'm struggling for a way, as I say, to find a gentler language. I pray that I have not dishonored the Holy Father. Again, honor thy father, honor thy mother. That commandment is not honor thy father when, you happen to like him and he happens to seem like a good father to you, or honor thy mother, when she happens to please you. No, it's honor thy father and thy mother. Okay? I'm struggling with this. I'll give you another story. It's I'm on a roll here. This is unscripted. Anyway, yeah, I was in France actually, and this is something that happened to my wife. My wife knew a priest who had been doing, the Latin Mass for many, many years. I always had the impression that he had suffered a great deal. I don't want to say too much about him, but he was close to the Institute of Christ the King in many ways. A very noble and admirable priest. And my wife was talking to him about some of her anger at what was happening in the church back then. And this is 10, 14 years ago, I think. And he, if I recall correctly, he said something like this. She said she was angry. And he said maybe something like this, that he used to be angry, but now he was something else. He said, Je souffre, I suffer. Okay? And he said that, he said something like this, that there was a very, very, difficult work of honoring three different factors, because they could all be different. Honoring one's bishop, honoring the Holy Father, and honoring tradition. Very, very difficult job in our current climate to honor all of those three things simultaneously. But my impression of this French priest is that he was making the effort. It's important to make the effort, in my view. I've really asked myself, prayed about this long and hard, maybe not long and hard enough. Must I remain silent? I said at the beginning of the video, because so many people, in so many situations over the years, have remained silent. Padre Pio, Saint Pio, as far as I know, was very silent in the 1960s. In the face of changes that would have very, very deeply, deeply concerned him. He was silent. I've mentioned the Institute of Christ the King in my books and in these videos. I am very deeply moved by the example of the Institute of Christ the King. All right, friends. It's the next day now from my point of view, And I've been considering what I said yesterday because, as I say, I said it in a rather more unscripted, impromptu way than normal. It's easier to make mistakes when one does that. I made an apology in the course of it, but I'm relatively happy with what I said. I'm not going to go and re-record it as I often do, but I want to just make a certain, not apology, but precision. Um, I was very much emphasizing the silence of St. Pio or praising the charity of the Institute of Christ the King. What I would like to make clear now is that in doing that, I was in no way meaning to criticize those who do not take the path of silence. I'm not taking the path of silence now, and maybe I'm going to say that I should have spoken out much more clearly, much earlier than I did. No, what I'm really trying to do here is encourage us to struggle with these matters. I think, I said that I had spent an extraordinary amount of time for myself on social media, just, reading it. I told you, I think that how I'd been, saw something to the effect of calling the Holy Father, something like that, Satan in big capital letters. Can't recall exactly. Um, that, I imagine, would be a case of someone who was not struggling with this matter. He or she um, was expressing their pain. And their pain, this person, can't remember who it was, this person's pain is valid. I don't know what prompted that person, but, we're living in a world where it's becoming normal to, kill yourself or chop your genitals off. At least for some people, a world where we're teaching people, teaching young people that kind of thing is, normal. All kinds of things are becoming normalized. Diabolical things are becoming normalized. And many people might be looking at some of the liberal and progressive currents in the church and yes, in the Vatican, and seeing that those currents were also helping to normalize the diabolical. So I don't know what was in that person's mind who wrote that. That person may have been far more awake to the world horror than I am. But yeah, I'm encouraging us to struggle. If someone has really struggled with these matters, struggled with the language that they're going to use, then I salute that struggle. I mean, this is why I brought up the French Latin Mass priest that I knew, close to Christ the King. I think he had struggled a great deal, suffered a great deal. I very much, heard what he was saying about how hard it was to reconcile obedience to one's bishop, obedience to the Holy Father, and obedience to tradition, honoring all three of those. He is an example of struggle. People who are making that struggle, I honor. So, for example, I certainly honor the great Archbishop Lefebvre, to whom we owe so much. Um, in calling him the great Archbishop Lefebvre, I'm actually echoing Benedict XVI, because apparently when Bishop Follet met Benedict XVI, Benedict XVI described him as this great man of the universal church. So Pope Benedict XVI honored Archbishop Lefebvre, and I honor his incredible courage, tenacity, outspokenness in an extremely difficult situation, as indeed I honor how deeply and acutely aware he was in the 1960s, when it was like so much of the church seemed to be asleep or seemed to be in this strange euphoria about the wonder of Vatican II. Archbishop Lefebvre was awake when others, I think, were asleep. That said, there's many mysterious things here. I think that we owe so much to Archbishop Lefebvre in the 70s and early 80s. The consecrations in 1988 are something very mysterious to me. That act of disobedience. It's a mystery I'm not going to ponder now, but I'm just pointing out that great courage like Archbishop Lefebvre is something that I honor, and I honor the great awareness of the current situation that is happening amongst a number of commentators on the situation I mentioned, Dr. Kwasniewski, earlier. I might not always use the same language as these people, but I honor their awakeness to this situation, and as I said earlier, it also involves not just a mental awakeness, it's an awakeness of the heart. What the destruction of the liturgy is really costing people, costing real people. This is nothing abstract. This liturgy, these questions are about real people and real souls. Earlier I raised the whole question of what the destruction of faith might mean for an elderly person who'd lost their faith in a nursing home. I didn't even go into, of course, the issues beyond this world. The issues of, the purgative and hellish experience that people have beyond this world. And we need to remember what happens beyond this world. This is again, why I take this so very, very seriously, why I dare to suggest that at the beginning of this video, this isn't just a crisis in the church, it's a crisis in the West, it's a crisis for humanity. This deep, deep falling into materialism, into lack of faith. We go on and on here, folks. I'm going to say this. I take a long time to record these videos, often recorded over the course of several days. Even as I'm speaking now, the situation is changing. Things are happening that weren't happening a few days ago. I really do want to draw this to a close, but I promised to go into the matter of Valentin Tomberg and at the beginning of this video, and I'm going to do that. So I'll just say, this video had a major episode on Valentin Tomberg. Last episode, 3-hour episode. By many indices, it's the looks like it may turn out to be the most successful episode that's ever been on this channel, drawing new subscribers, drawing people that wouldn't necessarily watch my other videos. Because as I said on that video, I was a very liberal and progressive person in the past, a New Ager, and it took Valentin Tomberg to get me to listen to perspectives that are not liberal, that are traditional, that Tomberg was so deeply arguing for the life force of Catholic tradition. And he very much spoke about a process, as we said earlier, of degeneration and death forces unleashed in the church in the wake of Vatican II. All right? And these were very, very hard for me to take on board. I actually think I mentioned in the previous video that when I saw what Tomberg had to say about Vatican II, it made my heart sink. We are going to just focus briefly on that now, because it's relevant to everything that I'm saying here. Yeah, I mean, actually, Tomberg, writing about Vatican II in the 1960s, I already said that the great Archbishop Lefebvre was awake to what was going on, while other people were fast asleep. I think we can see from what I'm about to go into now, just a little bit, from Tomberg, that Tomberg was looking at things in ways that were very similar to the way Archbishop Lefebvre. So we're going to look a little bit at Tomberg's final book, written in the late 60s, Lazarus Come Forth. So, yeah, I just said, it's so easy to get focused on this world, and really forget that there is a world of real souls existing beyond this world, beyond the threshold that we cross at death. Tomberg is never taking his eyes off, I think, the realities beyond this world, and he became very concerned that certain currents of thought, of theology at Vatican II were in danger of forgetting the next world. For example, in this book, Lazarus Come Forth, he critiques the theology of Schillebeeckx, who was so influential at Vatican II. He doesn't mention people like Hans Küng, who were active at Vatican II. But, I think undeniably, there were very, very progressive radicals with enormous influence at the council. People like Hans Küng, and they were promoting currents of thought, of theology that, well, Tomberg would say they're actually not very theological. He would say they're more anthropological or humanistic. We're just going to read some things. A strong movement is working within the Church, which has chosen this world with its pretensions and demands. It seems that this movement is drawn with irresistible force to the human sphere belonging to the realm of time. All right? Heaven is not subject to the realm of time. It wants to be human and humanistic and up-to-date, progressive. Thereby, it subjects itself to the laws of time, which is the path of inevitable degeneration, decline, and death. It is quite useless to argue with people of this trend, just as useless as to try and bring to his senses a man who is in love. They are in love with anthropology, and theology has no further attraction to them. This is what we're having in the church. A church of justice and peace, but not oriented towards eternal reality. And Tomberg is making the case that this, in so many ways, came into force at Vatican II. Now, I'm gonna keep going. I found this so hard when I was a liberal. Thus, it happened that the second Pentecostal miracle, hoped and prayed for by the Holy Father, he means St. John the 23rd, the proclamation by the World Council of a deepened, elevated, and expanded treasure of church revelation was replaced by a policy of keeping in step with the times. This is what was going on at Vatican II. I think he's right. Like update everything, keep in step with the times. This is still what is going on we see today. And if the times, friends, the times are normalizing the diabolical, well, it may be that, certain progressives and liberals in the church want to, dare I say it, keep in step with the times of normalizing the diabolical. All right? So I'm just adding my commentary to Tomberg here. The council did not reflect the timeless inspirations of heaven, but rather the earthly needs, complaints, wishes, and demands of the age. It became a sort of religious parliament with a progressive left, a conservative right, he has that in quote unquote, quote, a progressive left, unquote, a conservative right, quote unquote, and a moderate centre. Thus, people spoke of a democratization of the church, now breaking through. The world, this world he means, he has that in quotes, remarked with satisfaction, the Catholic Church is moving closer to us. Yes, just a while, and it will be part of us. The Council exudes a fresh wind, the wind of a free and modern spirit. And a fresh wind did indeed blow from the Council. It blew up such problems as the abolition of the celibacy of priests suddenly become pressing, the problem of mixed marriages with those of another faith, the problem of acceptability of the pill, and other methods of contraception, the problem of demythologization of the Holy Scripture and of tradition, the problem of the Mass in the sense of abolishing Latin as the liturgical and sacred language. I'm going to say something, possibly for the people joining this channel who are interested in Tomberg. Tomberg is basically saying that these were all false problems. There wasn't a problem. If what this suggests is there's not a problem with Latin as the sacred language. There's not a problem with, married priests and so on and so forth. The Council is throwing up all these things as problems. This was so hard for me to handle 20 years ago. I was, back then, I was waiting for Cardinal Martini. I was hoping that Cardinal Martini would become the next Holy Father. And very clearly, Pope Francis is deeply indebted to Cardinal Martini. But anyway, we will just go on a bit forth. The problem of the Mass, I'll repeat, in the sense of abolishing Latin as this liturgical and sacred language, and the substitution for it of many national languages, and many other problems associated with conforming to the spirit of the age at the cost of tradition. What Tomberg is emphasizing in all his Catholic works is the importance of tradition. Tradition carries life. And if we try to rupture with tradition, like the so-called esoteric Christians did, as Steiner did, as the Protestants did, it will cost us life force. And he's suggesting that the so-called problems brought up by Vatican II or the progressive theologians who want to overcome the Mass or want to demythologize Scripture and so on and so forth, all of this is to cost the life of tradition and to invite death. I'm going to keep going. I'm pretty passionate right now. Anyway, but these are serious matters. The fresh wind of the council was not the wind of the Pentecost miracle in the church, but a wind blowing out of the world into the church through a portal which had now been opened. It was not the effect of the church on the world, but the effect of the world on the church. So hard for me. So hard, I think, for quite a number of Tomberg's readers to really hear that this is what he's saying about progressive currents. So we're going back to the last video. It was not the effect of the church on the world, but the effect of the world on the church. Against the will and hope of the now deceased Pope John the 23rd and of his successor Paul VI, it happened that the Second Vatican Council became a door which opened to the world, but in such a way that the world's wind blew into the church. The council for which Pope John the 23rd prayed did, in fact, fail. It failed to fulfill the highest and most responsible task of the church's leadership: to guard the portal where the way begins, which leads to degeneration, to exhaustion, and to death, Hades, the way of the world. The failure to guard the threshold of the portal opening up to the way of the world, which, as we have shown above, is nothing else and can be nothing else but the way to death. Well, he goes onward. He goes into another set of ideas there, but very clearly he's pointing to these death forces of death, unleashed in the church through, worldly problems. The problem of, we need to have married priests, or we need to, get rid of the sacred and liturgical language, or we need this, we need that, the worldly complaints of the time. He's suggesting that all of this leads to death, decay, degeneration in the church. And it's Tomberg, above all others, who has led me to this defense of Catholic tradition. Tomberg was also very much expressing the real and inevitable regeneration of the church. So he was very much speaking about how we had entered into a time of degeneration and decay of the church, but he was pointing to a time of hope and joy and regeneration of the church, and we're going to go into that another time in another episode. But what can I say? We don't appear to be in a joyous time yet of regeneration of the church. Tomberg points to those times in the past. He speaks about, for example, the so-called Counter-Reformation, with saints like Ignatius of Loyola being a time of regeneration of the church. In fact, he wants to say that's the true Reformation of the church. Doesn't like the term Counter-Reformation. But we need to be here in the present. in the present, what I've just brought up from Tomberg goes to the very crux of the whole problem here, because the Holy Father is seeking very much to protect Vatican II. I think that's at the heart of the whole pontificate. Things like raising Pope Paul VI to sainthood, all kinds of things. That's at the heart of this pontificate. And as Catholics, we are called to not only obey the Holy Father, but the documents of Vatican II have a binding authority on us. As Catholics, unless we want to take the route of the SSPX, and as much as I honor the great Archbishop Lefebvre for what he was awake to in the 60s and 70s and 80s, I cannot join with that act of disobedience in 1988, which, as I say, it remains very mysterious to me. I side with people that are like the Institute of Christ the King, that seek to obey the Holy Father, that seek to obey the teaching in the documents of Vatican II, interpreted in the light of tradition, interpreted, what Pope Benedict called the hermeneutic of continuity. Now, and here I am, I've just produced this whole text from Tomberg, speaking about the failure of Vatican II. Now, I think it's significant to note that Tomberg is not actually speaking about the documents of Vatican II. As far as I know, the documents of Vatican II are not speaking about things like, the so-called problem of contraception, or the so-called problem of married priests, or the so-called problem of mixed marriages. We could maybe think that the Holy Spirit protected us from those kinds of currents that were present at Vatican II from going into the documents. Tomberg is witnessing to a situation, though, where all of that, even if it didn't reach, get into the documents, was going on at the council. And, the Rhine flows into the Tiber. Wiltgen is witnessing to that. I haven't, looked at the book in a long time, but, I seem to recall there that Wiltgen is reporting Karl Rahner. I hope I don't overstate this, but sort of running around the council trying to assure that reverence to Our Lady, to the Blessed Virgin Mary, was diminished as much as possible for ecumenical reasons of pleasing Protestants. I think that's the essence of it. It's long time since I looked at that. I'm no expert on theologians like Schillebeeckx and Hans Küng and Karl Rahner, who were, so active at the council. I know, some of the standard things that, after the council, I believe Schillebeeckx became famous, or maybe infamous, for saying things like, we are saved despite the cross. Some of these prominent theologians at Vatican II, you can really question very much if they were even Christian. So, Wiltgen and Tomberg and Archbishop Lefebvre are pointing out that there was a wind of the world blowing through Vatican II. This is not to negate the action of the Holy Spirit at Vatican II. At least I'm not going to negate the action of the Holy Spirit at Vatican II. As I say, the fact that many of these things are now forgotten because they're not in the documents may well be, it would seem to be, thanks to the grace of the Holy Spirit at Vatican II. And as Catholics, unless we want to go the route of the SSPX, the documents of Vatican II have a binding authority for us. Tomberg is also very much emphasizing obedience. He comes back again and again and again to that in his Catholic works. I know that there are some people who try to, interpret that and say, well, Tomberg is talking about obedience to some kind of, inner dimension or something like that. But, if you read him carefully, he's talking about ecclesiastical discipline and the importance of that. There's another passage in his writings where he's deploring innovations in the liturgy, deploring the way Protestants are regularly creating liturgical innovations. I believe that was written, in the years, before the new Mass was established. So I don't know what to say. We're in this situation here that maybe the Holy Father, I'm speculating, I can't say, hopes that by bringing this Mass to an end and the culture around it to an end, that some of these things will die down. But the problem is that we have all these great thinkers. I mean, I believe I'm right in even saying that Joseph Ratzinger critiqued elements of the Vatican II document Lumen Gentium. You even have Ratzinger, who becomes Benedict XVI, saying, right there with the documents, he's not entirely happy. The church faces a big problem here. This is what I've been trying to say in the video. We have a 60-year problem here. And unless the Holy Father wants to start, maybe revive the index, put certain authors on the index, I probably shouldn't joke about this, but, that there is obviously a whole set of thinkers out there thinking about this for 60 years now. It would be very, very hard to suppress all of that. What can I say? I didn't come to this defense of tradition because I sort of fell into a kind of Latin Mass community. No, I struggled with it for many years. Tomberg, above all, helped me. But 20 years ago, I was reading books that were very critical of Ratzinger. I remember reading, John L. Allen's book on Ratzinger 20 years ago, and 20 years ago I thought it was a good book. I studied and I thought, and I came to the position that I did, and I'm like many other people who are now being published by, people being published by my publisher, like Angelico Press, or, Dr. Kwasniewski. Unless we're going to sort of put all these people on some kind of index, the church is going to, I hope I'm not being too flippant there, there's 60 years of questioning. 60 years of questioning for legitimate reasons. When you see that the theologians of Vatican II that had such prominence there, went on to things like Schillebeeck's, we are saved despite the cross, we have deep, deep, deep problems here, friends. Alright, final things now. I really pray that I have not been too flippant here, or, God forgive me, too snide. I realized that I came close, maybe more than that, to accusing certain theologians present at Vatican II of being, maybe not Christian, or less than Christian. Schillebeeck's saying we are saved despite the cross. as I've been pondering this, another sort of bon mot from Sheila Beeks came to mind. Sheila Beeks spoke at one point about at least certain traditional Christian understandings of the crucifixion amounting to a, quote, sadistic, bloody myth. So it's with those kinds of things in mind that I say that about certain kinds of theology that was present at Vatican II and was then very much flourishing in the wake of Vatican II, theology that is in all, well, not all, but a huge number of our Catholic universities and seminaries. Again, I'm pointing to the very grave systemic problem here. And that's, again, it's a matter of language. I do want to get away from a culture of insults. I'm scared that I've maybe been too insulting on this video. I really have wanted to find a language of tragedy, a language of heartbreak, rather than insulting people. And I'm concerned I came too close to the edge at times. I'm also concerned that I might have been overly critical of certain traditionalists, who are using this language at times that is, not the language that I would use. I want to say again that those traditionalists are often privy to far more than I am about what's really going on in the Vatican. Their hearts are in pain. I've spent this last week really looking at social media. It's quite an eye-opener for me. But that all went into the mix here. But when I think about all the incredibly worldly, modern theology that is being taught in our seminaries and universities, is being now promoted in many places in the Vatican, I can only salute the traditionalists. The kind of books that my publisher, Angelico Press, is publishing, I feel like maybe recommending a couple. I adore Phoenix from the Ashes, published by Angelico Press, by Henry Sire. I also very deeply esteem the books that Peter Kwasniewski is publishing. Angelico Press is publishing his books about the liturgy. He's making important things incredibly lucid and beautifully clear. I've actually praised Dr. Kwasniewski's writing before in an episode on this channel. It's episode number 12. I want to close now by indicating my debt to Dr. Kwasniewski, Henry Sire, blogs like Rorati Cheli over the years, Joseph Shaw. I have an incredible debt to these people. This, I think all I'm really trying to say is it is a struggle. It is a struggle to be a Catholic, to be obedient to the Holy Father, to be obedient, to honor tradition. This is a struggle, and I want to encourage us all to struggle. All right? So that's just about it. I think I will just remind people that I do have my own books on Catholic tradition, that you've seen them up behind me on the bookshelf while I've been speaking, but maybe the best place to look for them is my Amazon author page, and you'll find a link to that down below in the texts of all these videos. I think my books are really, my real work above all my books. The videos are secondary. But anyway, I'm exploring all of these ideas in other videos. Another thing, I just want to explore how the Catholic mystery has the capacity to render us human in a dehumanizing world. So I'm going to point to another video I've done, How Catholicism Made Me Human. That's all I'm going to say now, friends. Just thank you for listening, and God bless all of you.